The smell of recycled air always reminded me that we were far from home, not the kind of far you measure in kilometers, the kind you measure in years. Threshold 7 was not a beautiful posting. It was a diplomatic outpost dressed up as a colony, which is a lie everyone agrees to tell because the truth makes the paperwork harder. 43 human families lived here, between curved walls they had not built, under pale light that came from suns that did not know our names. I had been here 11 months when things started to feel wrong. The Veth Collective built this station. Their architecture had no right angles. Every wall curved, every corridor bent, every ceiling arched in a soft sweep that made you feel like you were inside something alive. I had learned to stop noticing it. You adapt. That is what humans do best and sometimes what we do worst. Captain Ren Vasquez had been my operational partner on this posting since the beginning. Not partner in the romantic sense, the operational sense, the sense that means, this is the person who knows where I keep the emergency rations, and I know how many steps it takes him to reach his sidearm, and neither of us ever has to say any of that out loud. He was the kind of person you build a wall out of when everything else is falling. He remembered the name of every family in the colony. He knew which kids were struggling in school, which couples were fighting, which old man walked the outer corridor every night because sleep had stopped working for him after the transit jump. Ren knew all of it. He cared about all of it in the specific, quiet way of someone who understands that people are worth the effort. His daughter Mia had come to live with him 6 months into the posting. She was 9 years old and she moved through the Veth corridors like she owned them. She drew the buildings in a notebook she carried everywhere. The Veth cultural observers watched her with an interest they did not bother to hide. I noted that and filed it under things to think about later. I was still thinking about it when Ren came back from a meeting with the Veth regional executor 4 days before everything broke open. He came through the door and set his jacket on the chair and stood with his back to me for 3 seconds longer than any ordinary moment required. I had seen that look exactly once before. I did not ask him about it then. I did not ask him about it now. Some things you carry until the weight forces them out of you, and Ren was not ready. I knew the shape of his not ready. I had learned it across 2 decades and 4 deployments. He poured water, he drank it, he asked if Mia had eaten. I said yes. He nodded and went to find her, and I watched him go, and I told myself it was nothing. Threshold 7 had been stable for 11 months. The Veth Collective were not a violent species, officially. Their civilization was 3,000 years old. They had protocols for everything, calibrated responses for every scenario, a procedure for every conceivable form of conflict. They had never, in 3,000 years of interstellar history, encountered a situation their frameworks could not contain. That was the first thing I should have paid more attention to. I spent the next morning reviewing supply manifests. This is what you do when you are trying not to think about something. You find the most tedious work available and you build a small fortress out of numbers and let the hours pass. Mia found me at my desk around midday and put a drawing in front of me without asking. It was one of the Veth buildings, the curved outer dome, lines so accurate for a 9-year-old that I genuinely stopped and looked. In the center, standing inside the building, was a stick figure with a round head and a very straight back. She said that was me. I asked why. She said I was the only straight line in the building. I did not know what to do with that. I thanked her. She picked up the drawing and left. I kept thinking about it for the rest of the afternoon the way you keep touching a bruise. Not because it feels good, because you need to know it is still there. That evening I found Ren standing at the outer viewport. The stars here had different names, and I had never bothered to learn them. He was staring at them with the expression of a man doing math he cannot make come out right. I stood beside him and said nothing for a while. Then I asked him what the executor had told him. He was quiet for long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then he said there were factions within the collective that did not share the government's position on human settlements in this sector. He said the government was managing it. He said everything was under control. He said it the way people say things they want to be true. I asked him if I should be worried. He looked at me then. Ren had dark eyes that worked like a camera shutter. They took everything in and showed very little back. He said, "Worry is not the right word." That was the last real conversation we had. The next day passed without incident. I double-checked the corridor security logs. I reviewed evacuation protocols. I did it quietly, without filing a report, because filing a report meant admitting I had a reason to, and admitting that felt like pulling a pin. The families in the colony went about their lives. Children ran in the curved hallways. Someone cooked something that smelled like home. The old man walked his nightly corridor. I did not sleep well. Mia stayed close to Ren that day. She sat beside him at dinner and showed him her new drawings, and he looked at every single one with the same attention he gave to tactical maps. He asked her about each building. She explained them with the seriousness of an architect presenting to a board. He kept one of the drawings. He folded it carefully and put it inside his jacket, against his chest. I noticed. I did not say anything. That night I sat at my desk with the security feeds on one screen and the stars on the other, and somewhere between the two, I understood what his expression had been carrying since that meeting. He had not been worried. He had been preparing. The distinction between those two things is the loneliest distance in the world. I turned off the second screen. I read the supply manifests again. I told myself morning would clarify things. It did. Just not the way I meant. I heard it before I saw it. A sound like pressure releasing, like a door being opened that was never meant to be a door. Then nothing. 3 full seconds of nothing, which is the loudest sound a corridor can make. I was moving before I finished the thought. The security feed had gone dark on the residential east wing. Not static, dark, the kind of dark that is a decision. I ran. Ren's quarters were at the end of residential east. I had walked that corridor 600 times. I knew exactly how long it took at a run. I counted the seconds because counting was the only thing keeping the rest of my mind from going to places it could not afford to go yet. I reached the junction. I stopped. The corridor was quiet in a way corridors are not supposed to be quiet. Everything was still. The light panels above hummed their standard tone. The walls curved in their standard arcs. Nothing was visibly wrong except for everything. I moved forward. I found Ren near the far end. I will not describe what the corridor told me in detail. I will describe only what mattered. The geometry of where he was and how he had positioned himself said everything that needed to be said about what he had done in the last moments before I arrived. His back was to the wall. Between him and the door to his quarters there was no space. He had filled it. He had put himself in it and he had not moved from it. His daughter's door was intact. I stood there for a moment with that fact and let it be the largest thing in the world. Then I opened the door. Mia was in the corner with her notebook pressed flat against her chest, both arms wrapped around it the way you hold something irreplaceable. She was not crying. She was doing something harder than crying. She was being very, very still, the way he had told her to be. I crossed the room and crouched in front of her. She looked at me with Ren's eyes in a smaller face. She said, "He told me to stay behind him, and I did." I did not speak for a moment. Then I said, "I know." I picked her up, she let me. She kept the notebook. I carried her out of the room and down the corridor, and I kept my body turned so she was looking the other way. I do not know if it worked. I have never asked her. I got her to the main hub. I handed her to Clara, our colony coordinator, and told Clara in a voice I did not recognize as my own to keep Mia in the hub and not to ask questions yet. Clara looked at my face and did not ask questions. I went back to the security station. I pulled the distress beacon interface. Colonial Military Emergency Protocol has a 3-word format for maximum urgency. The words are known to every soldier in the Corps. They mean something very specific. They mean, one of ours is down, the situation is uncontained, and we are requesting immediate response without conditions or delay. I transmitted the 3 words. Then I sat and waited, because waiting was the only remaining thing to do, and I had always been better at action than at waiting, and this was therefore the worst possible thing I could be asked to do, and I did it anyway. The Veth regional executor made contact 40 minutes later. His representative delivered a formal communication in the measured, careful tone that the Veth used for all official matters. I listened to the entire thing. I noted that it was thorough. I noted that it was structured with the precision of a species that had been managing interstellar incidents for 3,000 years. They acknowledged what had occurred. They attributed it to a faction operating outside official collective sanction. They expressed what their language categorized as regret. They outlined an offer of what they called reparations, calibrated to the nature of the loss. Calibrated to the nature of the loss. I read that phrase 3 times. I did not respond to the communication. I saved the file. I closed the terminal. I went back to the hub where Mia was sitting beside Clara with her notebook open, drawing something I could not see from the doorway. I sat down next to her. She did not look up immediately. When she did, she studied my face the way her father used to study tactical displays. Carefully, without emotion, looking for information rather than comfort. She asked if people were coming. I said yes. She asked if they were coming from Earth. I said yes. She nodded. She looked back at her notebook. She kept drawing. I watched her draw and I thought about the 3 words I had sent into deep space, and I thought about what those 3 words would set in motion. And for the first time since I had reached that corridor, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. It lasted about 4 seconds. Then I put it somewhere else and focused on what came next, because that is the other thing humans do. We put things somewhere else and we keep going. We are extraordinarily good at it. It is our best feature and our worst habit, and I have never been able to fully separate the 2. The colony families were informed carefully. Neil, our senior liaison officer, handled the briefings with the particular gentleness of someone who has delivered bad news enough times to know that you never get better at it. You only get more careful. The families received it the way people receive things too large to hold, by going very quiet and then, one by one, reaching for each other. That night Mia slept in a spare bunk in the hub, and I sat outside the door. I did not sleep. At some point before morning, one of the Veth cultural observers from the administrative wing came to find me. His name in their language was unpronounceable by human vocal anatomy, so the colony staff called him Owen, a name he had accepted without comment. Owen sat beside me without being invited. This was a Veth custom I had never fully decoded. They did not ask permission to offer presents. They simply offered it and let you choose what to do with it. He said nothing for a while. Then he asked me what I was feeling. The question was genuine. Owen was not being unkind. He was, in his way, trying to understand. The Veth had no framework for this. They had frameworks for everything, but this particular arrangement of events had no category in 3,000 years of their accumulated experience. I told him I was not sure feeling was the right word for it. He considered this. He asked what word was right. I thought about it. I said waiting. He did not understand that. I could see it in the way his expression, which was already very still by human standards, became even more still. The Veth processed confusion by going quiet. I told him that when something happened to one of ours, we did not calculate a proportional response. I told him that was not how we were built. He asked what we did instead. I looked at the dark viewport and the stars I had never learned the names of, and I thought about those 3 words traveling through deep space and what was already moving in their direction. I told him, we answer. He sat with that for a long moment. Then he went back to his section of the station, and I sat alone with Mia's door at my back, and I kept watch until the morning came. 6 days of silence from Earth. That is what it was, officially. 6 days in which no communication arrived, no diplomatic channel was opened, no demand was filed, no response was transmitted through any of the standard interstellar protocols. The Veth Cultural Division had a monitoring team dedicated entirely to Earth communications from the moment my distress beacon was received by their network sensors. Owen told me this not as a confession, but as a statement of fact. They were watching because watching was their method. They observed, they recorded, they analyzed, they calibrated. It was how they had survived and thrived for 3,000 years. For 6 days they watched and recorded silence. I observed them observing. On day 2, their monitoring team upgraded the situation from a category they called routine diplomatic incident to a category they called requiring additional framework. I did not know this at the time. Owen told me later. He said the category upgrade was significant. The Veth did not change categories lightly. On day 4, they held an internal review. Still no communication from Earth. Still no demands filed. Still no channel requested. The Veth executors' formal offer of reparations had gone without response for 96 hours. In every previous incident in Veth interstellar history, a response of some kind had arrived within 24 hours. Silence was not in their model of how species behaved. On day 5, they created a new category. Owen told me the name of it. My translation matrix could not render it cleanly. The closest approximation it produced was the specific concern of not knowing which unit of measurement applies. I sat with that translation for a long time. It felt accurate in ways that were not comfortable. On day 6, I received a private communication from Earth. Rear Admiral Teresa Kwan, Colonial Command, Deep Operations Division. I had served under Kwan across 2 postings before Threshold 7. She was the kind of commanding officer who made decisions the way surgeons make incisions, precisely, without hesitation, and with full knowledge of what she was cutting through. She had once reassigned an entire tactical team mid-deployment because their commanding officer used the word unnecessary when describing a casualty. She did not accept that word. She did not believe in it. Her message was 11 seconds long. I played it 3 times. Then I told Mia we were going to need to pack light and that we should be ready to move within the hour. Mia looked at me over her notebook and said, "Are they here?" "Not yet," I said. She nodded and started packing with the practical efficiency of a child who had grown up in a military household. She did not ask what light meant or how much she could bring. She packed her notebook. She packed the small photograph she kept folded inside its back cover. She packed 1 change of clothes. I watched her do it and understood that children raised in these environments absorb things the adults around them never intended to teach. I filed that thought away for a day when I had room for it. The Veth government made contact with Earth's diplomatic office on day 7. I was given access to the transcript because I was the senior human official present and protocol required it. I read it at my station with a cup of cold tea I had forgotten to drink. The Veth communication was everything their civilization had refined over millennia, precisely worded, formally structured, careful in its acknowledgement of the incident, thorough in its distinction between the responsible faction and the collective government, measured in its offer of ongoing negotiation. It was, objectively, a model diplomatic document. Earth's office responded the same day. The response was 7 words. I have read many diplomatic communications in 22 years of service. I have read demands and proposals and offers and counteroffers across a dozen interstellar species and 4 separate treaty negotiations. I know the language. I know the weight of words in this context. Those 7 words were the most precise thing I had ever read from a desk officer. I will not record them here. What I will say is that they were not a threat. A threat implies uncertainty about outcome. These 7 words implied no uncertainty whatsoever. They were simply a description of what was already in motion. I read them twice, then I closed the terminal. Owen found me in the corridor 20 minutes later. He had developed the habit of finding me in corridors when things happened. I had not decided yet whether I found this irritating or appreciated it. He said the collective government had been in emergency session since receiving Earth's response. I said that made sense. He asked whether 7 words was a large number or a small number, by human standards, for this type of communication. I said small. He was quiet for a moment. He asked if that was significant. I said yes. He processed this carefully. He asked whether, in my experience, fewer words from humans meant more concern or less concern. I looked at him. I said more. He went back to report to his team. I watched him go. His posture, which was normally composed in the deliberate way of a species trained from birth to manage expression, had something new in it. I could not name it in Veth terms. In human terms, I would have called it the first understanding of a thing you cannot unsee. 3 hours later, Neil came to find me at the nav feed station. He had pulled access to the deep space approach sensors, and he wanted me to look at something. I looked. I stood at that screen for a long time without speaking. The approach was coming from the direction of the inner transit lanes, which meant it had already cleared 2 standard navigation checkpoints, which meant it had been moving for longer than 6 days, which meant the order had been given before my distress beacon even arrived, which meant someone at Colonial Command had been watching Threshold 7 and drawing their own conclusions before I drew mine. I thought about that. I thought about Wren in that meeting room, coming back with a look I recognized from one previous occasion I still did not describe aloud. I thought about the word he had used. Not worried. Preparing. Neil asked me what it was. He meant the approach on the sensor. He had read the data but wanted confirmation from someone with more context. I told him to increase the range on the sensor array and show me the full spread. He did. We stood there together and looked at it for a while. Neil said, "That is not a diplomatic vessel." I said no. He said, "That is not a standard response unit either." I said no. He was quiet for a moment. Then, in the voice of someone revising everything they thought they understood about a situation, he said, "How many?" I told him the number. He sat down. Mia had come into the nav room at some point during this. I did not notice her until she was standing at my elbow, her notebook open to a fresh page, pencil moving. She was drawing a ship. She had never seen the ships on the sensor. She was drawing from imagination. The ship in her sketch was long and angular with straight, hard lines that cut across the page like a declaration. She tore the page out and held it up. She asked me if that was right. I looked at her drawing. I looked at the sensor display. Close enough, I said. She tucked the drawing into the back of her notebook and went to sit against the wall and kept drawing, because she was 9 years old, and the world was very large, and her way of holding it was to draw it down to a size that made sense. I turned back to the nav feed and watched Earth's answer move through the dark. The Veth monitoring team filed 3 category upgrades that day. They were running out of categories. The fleet came out of approach speed 400 kilometers from Threshold 7's outer perimeter. Not a docking approach, not a negotiation posture. They stopped at a distance that was not accidental and oriented in a manner that communicated, without words, everything that needed to be communicated before any words were exchanged at all. They waited. The Veth government had 3 senior diplomats monitoring the approach feeds. Owen sat with his cultural team in the observation deck. Even the off-duty station staff had found reasons to be in rooms with viewport access. I sat at the main communications station with a fresh cup of tea I also did not drink. The fleet did not signal. It did not open a channel. It did not transmit its identification, its authorization, or its intentions, which was in direct violation of 7 standard interstellar protocols that every spacefaring species in this region had agreed to uphold. It simply waited. The Veth executor opened a channel to the fleet after 40 minutes. The standard greeting, the formal request for identification and stated purpose. The fleet acknowledged the channel. Then it continued to wait. The Veth executor sent a second communication, more formal this time, more structured. In a civilization with 3,000 years of diplomatic protocol, the second communication represented a significant escalation of official language. It meant, we are taking this seriously and we expect to be taken seriously in return. The fleet acknowledged, continued to wait. Owen came to stand beside me. His hands were clasped behind his back in a gesture I had learned was Veth for controlled concern. He watched the communications feed for a long moment without speaking. Then he asked me what the fleet was doing. I told him it was being present. He said that is all, only present. I said for now. He thought about that. He asked, is this a common human strategy? I told him I had never seen it at this scale before. I told him the scale was the message. Rear Admiral Quan's communication arrived at the Veth government's official diplomatic address 18 minutes later. I was given the text simultaneously as the senior human official on station. I was in the room when the Veth senior diplomats received it. Protocol allowed my presence as a formal witness. I sat against the far wall and read my copy quietly while they read theirs. Quan's communication was not long. It stated what had occurred, cleanly without elaboration, 1 paragraph. It stated who was responsible. Specifically, with names and organizational designations the Veth government's own records would confirm, 1 paragraph. It stated what Earth required. The requirements were 3. First, full and complete identification of every individual directly involved in the planning and execution of the action at Threshold 7, provided to Earth's Colonial Command within 48 hours. Second, the formal and permanent dissolution of the responsible faction's operational structure, conducted in full view of independent interstellar observers, and verified by Earth's own confirming team on the ground. Third, a guarantee of safe passage and full colonial rights for every human family on Threshold 7, written into standing Veth collective law rather than offered as a diplomatic courtesy, effective immediately upon signing. No reparations requested. No financial settlement offered or invited. No calibrated exchange of any kind. 3 things, a deadline, a fleet waiting 400 kilometers out. The room was very quiet. The lead Veth diplomat, a senior official whose name translated approximately as first voice, read the document twice. I watched him read it. His expression was the expression of someone trying to locate a known destination on a map that has revealed itself to be a completely different map. He looked up. He looked at me. He said, "Is this proportional, by your standards?" I thought about that carefully, because it was a real question and it deserved a real answer. I said, "By some standards." He asked which standards. I said, "The ones that apply when it is one of ours." He was quiet for a long time. The second diplomat leaned toward the first, and they exchanged a rapid series of phrases too low for my translator to catch fully. I caught fragments. I caught the word that had no equivalent in my matrix, yathvel, the word for disproportionate response, the concept they had never needed a word for until now. They were not using it as criticism. They were using it as description. The Veth government responded to Kwan's communication within 6 hours. There were things in the response that I expected and things that I did not. What I expected, they accepted all 3 requirements. What I did not expect, they accepted them without modification, without counterproposal, without the standard request for negotiation timeline extensions that every species in the known diplomatic community routinely filed as a matter of procedural courtesy. They simply said yes. All 3 immediately, without conditions. Owen explained it to me that evening. He said the government had made a calculation. They had looked at what was sitting 400 kilometers from their station, and they had looked at the 3 requirements and understood that this was not an opening position. It was not a starting point for negotiation. It was the complete statement of terms, presented once, by a species that had not come this far to discuss alternatives. He said the cultural team had spent the afternoon revising their entire framework for human diplomatic behavior. I said that seemed reasonable. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked a question he had clearly been building toward since morning. He said, "Your colleague, the captain, what he did in that corridor, is that common among humans to place yourself in that position?" I thought about how to answer. I said not all humans, some humans. He asked, "What kind of human does that?" I thought about Ren. I thought about the coffee orders and the knife in the left boot, and the drawing he had folded and placed inside his jacket. I said, the kind that decides somebody else matters more. Owen processed this. He sat with it the way he sat with things that did not fit his existing categories, not with discomfort, with genuine effort. He said, "We did not understand that this was possible." I said, "Most people do not until they see it." He said, "We will not forget it." I did not have a response to that. I believed he was sincere. I also understood that it could not give back what had been taken, and that understanding sat in my chest like a stone that was not going anywhere anytime soon. The process of meeting Earth's requirements took 8 days. The details are documented in the colonial command record, and documentation is not the same as meaning. What I will say is this: it was conducted precisely. Observers from 3 neutral species were present. Earth's confirming team was composed of people with steady hands and clear eyes who did their work without theater. The responsible faction was dismantled, completely, operationally, permanently. Every structure, every resource, every chain of authority. The Veth government did not resist this. They assisted it with the efficiency of a civilization that had decided very quickly which side of history it wanted to be recorded on. The colonial rights guarantee was written into standing Veth law on day 6. Mia watched the formal signing through a viewport from the corridor. She had her notebook. She was drawing. I stood beside her and watched her draw the scene, and I thought about how she would carry this for the rest of her life, and I hoped what she carried would include some of what he had given her, and not only what it had cost. On the 8th day, after the confirming team had filed its report, and the fleet had received Kwan's signal of satisfactory completion, I went to the medical bay where Ren had been prepared for transport home. The room was clean and quiet. The light was soft. It was a dignified room, which is the least a person deserves and often not what they receive, so I was grateful for it. I stood at the side of the transport case for a moment. I thought about 22 years. I thought about deployments and debriefs and bad coffee, and the particular silence of 2 people who know each other well enough not to need words for most things. I adjusted his collar. It was a small gesture, a reflex, the kind of thing you do for someone because you have done it before and it is one of the few things left to do. I reached into my jacket and took out the drawing, the first one, Mia at the center of the curved building, the only straight line. I folded it carefully and placed it inside his jacket pocket. I said 5 words to him. They were the right 5 words. I know that because the moment I said them, the stone in my chest did not go away, but it shifted. It settled into a different position, one I could carry rather than just endure. Then I left the room and went to find Mia. She was in the corridor drawing something new. I did not ask what it was. I sat down next to her, and we stayed there together while the fleet outside began its long movement toward home. 10 years is not long enough to forget the sound of a corridor going wrong. I know this because I still sleep lightly. I know this because I still count my steps in unfamiliar hallways. I know this because when the new cadets at the academy run their morning drills in the courtyard below my window, the rhythm of their boots on the stone path is the first thing I hear every day, and I have never once, in 2 years of this posting, been able to hear it without thinking about a corridor I am done describing. The Colonial Defense Academy sits on a hill above a wide green valley in the northern part of the country. The air is cold most of the year and smells like rain and cut grass and the particular sharpness of young people who have decided to do a hard thing and are in the early stages of discovering how hard it actually is. I find this refreshing. There is honesty in that particular discovery. I teach advanced field operations and interspecies engagement. The interspecies engagement course is new. It was not in the curriculum 10 years ago. It is in the curriculum now because Threshold 7 is in the curriculum now. Everything about Threshold 7 is in the curriculum now. The cadets read about it in their first semester. They read the Colonial Command Record, which is thorough and accurate and communicates all of the relevant facts and none of the things that facts cannot carry. By the time they reach my class in their 3rd semester, most of them have already built a version of the story in their heads. It is usually a version with more certainty in it than the real version had. I spend a lot of time working on that, on the certainty. My preferred method is to tell them what I actually saw and then let them sit with what I did not tell them, and explain that the gap between those two things is where all the real information lives. A cadet named Cole asked me, in the 3rd week of the current semester, whether I thought what Earth did at Threshold 7 was the right thing. Cole was a serious young man from somewhere in the northern region. He asked questions the way some people throw punches, directly, without setup, with genuine intent to make contact. I respected this about him. I had told him so, which had visibly made his day, which I had also respected. I told him that right is a word I have always been careful with, that I have seen things done in the name of right that were the furthest possible distance from it, and I have seen things done with no particular philosophy behind them that came out right by accident, and that the word itself does not carry as much information as people assume it does. He pushed back. He said, "But what do you think?" I looked at him for a moment. I said, "I think Ren Vasquez stood in a corridor and made a decision. And I think Earth saw what that decision cost and decided it was not going to stand for a universe in which that cost went without answer. And if you are asking me whether that is right, I can tell you it felt necessary in a way that precedes right. It felt like the only honest response to an honest fact." Cole wrote something in his notebook. He had a notebook, which I had noticed on the first day of class because it reminded me of someone, and because that reminder had hit me in the chest with the same small precision it always does, even now, even 10 years out. After class, he came to my desk and asked one more question. He asked, what did Earth actually change, not just at Threshold 7, long term? I told him to sit down, because it was going to take longer than a quick answer. The change in the galaxy was not loud. That is the first thing people get wrong about it. They expect, from the scale of what happened, an equally scaled visible transformation, a clear before and after, a formal moment where the interstellar community recalibrated. It was not like that. It was quieter. It was the kind of change that happens in the space between decisions. The moment where a species sits in a room and looks at a set of options and quietly removes one from consideration, and does not announce that removal, and does not file a report about it, and does not hold a ceremony for the thing they decided not to do. The Veth Collective now has a word for what happened at Threshold 7. The word is derived from an old Earth language, which is their way of attributing the concept to its source. Owen told me this in a message he sent 3 years after the events. He said the word had entered their educational curriculum. He said younger Veth were growing up understanding it as a principle rather than an incident. The word is Yathvel, their own original term for disproportionate response, which they have kept, but beside it in their diplomatic lexicon there is now a second entry. The new entry does not describe the human response as a flaw. It describes it as a specific human condition, activated by a specific trigger, and it notes with characteristic Veth precision that the trigger is not anger. It is not even grief. It is the fact of someone being one of ours. Owen said the entry was considered essential reading for any Veth official engaging in diplomacy with human colonies. I wrote back and told him I thought that was appropriate. He wrote back and asked how Mia was doing. Mia Vasquez was 19 years old and in her first year at the academy. This was, from a purely institutional standpoint, complicated. I was her instructor for interspecies engagement. She was my student. The overlap between who she was to me and what she was in that classroom was something we had negotiated privately at the start of the year with the specific directness of two people who have no use for pretense. She had said, "I need you to treat me like any other cadet." I had said, "I need you to not make that difficult." She had said, "When have I ever made anything easy for you?" We had both laughed. It was the first time in a long time that laughing had felt like the exact right thing to do, not the acceptable thing, the right one. Mia was not a simple student. She was, by the assessment of 3 separate instructors who had come to me independently to say it, the kind of student who made a classroom uncomfortable in the best possible way. She pushed back on received wisdom. She asked the second question when everyone else was satisfied with the first. She had an architectural eye that she applied to tactical problems, seeing structures in situations where others saw only events. She was going to be extraordinary. She was also still drawing buildings. She had built, over the years, a portfolio that her design professors described with the enthusiasm of people looking at something they cannot fully categorize. Her architectural style incorporated what she called honest lines. It was her term, not a formal school of design, though I had heard her explain it to another cadet once in terms that made the other cadet go very quiet. She had said, "A curved wall hides what is inside it. A straight wall tells you exactly what it is. There are places for both. But when you want something to stand for a long time, when you want it to mean something, you build it straight and you do not apologize for it." Her work had been included in a colonial design review for a new settlement in the outer expansion zone. She was 19. The inclusion had caused considerable commentary in the design community. She had received the commentary with the equanimity of someone who was used to being noticed for reasons connected to her name, and had decided, a long time ago, that she was going to be noticed for her work instead. I did not tell her I was proud of her. She would have deflected it with a joke, which is what you do when you are Ren Vasquez's daughter and people look at you with that particular weight in their eyes. I just kept being her instructor and trusted that she knew. Near the end of the semester, she came to my office. She sat in the chair across from my desk, which no cadet ever did voluntarily because the chair had a leg shorter than the others and created a disconcerting imbalance. Every cadet who sat in it spent the whole conversation subtly compensating. Mia sat in it with perfect stillness, which told me she had found the balance point in the first 10 seconds and adjusted without complaint, which was one of the most Ren things I had ever seen her do. She put a drawing on my desk. It was the station, Threshold 7, the outer dome with its Veth curves, rendered from memory in the steady lines of someone who had studied architecture long enough to draw it accurately from a decade-old impression. In the center of the dome, standing exactly where the first drawing had placed it, was a figure. Straight back, round head, very still. She said, "I have been drawing that figure for 10 years, and I only recently understood something about it." I said, "What did you understand?" She said, "I used to think the straight line was a difference, like it was separate from the curved walls, standing apart from them." She looked at the drawing for a moment. She said, "I think now it is the thing the curved walls are protecting. The curve and the straight line need each other. The straight line does not survive without something surrounding it, and the surrounding thing does not mean anything without something worth protecting at its center." The office was quiet. I looked at the drawing. I thought about a 9-year-old in a corner with her notebook, and a corridor I was done describing, and a man who had understood, before I did, what was coming and had placed himself accordingly. I thought about 5 words said in a quiet room, and a stone that had shifted but never left. I said, "Your father understood that." She said, "Yes." I said very clearly. She said, "Yes." She picked up the drawing and put it back in her bag. She stood. She looked at me with her father's camera shutter eyes, and for a moment I could not tell which of them I was looking at, because love, when it outlives the person it was given to, does that. It finds a face and it looks out of it, and the years collapse, and you are standing in 2 moments at once with no good way to move between them. She said, "Same time next week, instructor." I said, "Same time." She left. I sat at my desk for a long time after she was gone. Through the window I could see the courtyard. The late afternoon light was the color of something I did not have words for. Below, 2 cadets were running the perimeter path, their breathing audible even through the glass, their boots finding the rhythm. On my desk I had a folder. It contained 3 things I did not show to anyone and did not explain. The first was a printed copy of Kwan's 11-second message. I had never told anyone what it said, and I never would, and the reason for that was simple. It was not mine to tell. It was addressed to me, and it was about something that was mine to carry and no one else's. The second was the nav feed screenshot from the day Neil pulled the sensor data. The approach pattern, the scale, the geometry of what was moving toward Threshold 7. I kept it not as a record, but as a reminder of what it looks like when something that large moves on behalf of something that small and that irreplaceable. The third was the original drawing, the curved building and the stick figure. 10 years old, slightly creased at the fold lines, the pencil lines a little faded. The only straight line. I had carried it in a jacket pocket for the first 3 years. Then I understood that I needed to keep it somewhere safer. Not because it was fragile, though it was, because I kept taking it out and holding it, and that habit was the habit of someone trying to revisit something instead of letting it become part of the structure of what they were. Ren would have told me, in his pragmatic and gentle way, that those 2 things are very different, and that one of them is more useful than the other. So now I kept it in the folder, and I knew it was there, and that was enough. Outside, the cadets finished their perimeter run and stopped in the courtyard and bent over their knees, catching their breath. And then one of them straightened up and looked at the sky and said something to the other, and the other one laughed. And the sound of it came through the glass and into the room and sat there for a moment before the afternoon air took it. The galaxy learned something at Threshold 7. Treaties were revised. Diplomatic curricula were updated. Species that had been quietly testing the edges of what they could get away with in the outer expansion zones had, in the years since, stopped doing so. Not all of them, not forever, but enough of them for long enough that the expansion had continued, and the colonies had grown, and the families that had stood in curved corridors and held on to each other had eventually built homes that were their own. I do not carry that as a victory. I carry it as a fact, Victories require a finish line, and there is no finish line in this. There is only the ongoing, daily, unglamorous work of being the kind of species that shows up for its own. Ren showed me what that looks like at the level of one person in one corridor. Mia shows me what it looks like when it continues. That is all justice ever was. Somebody's child, still breathing, because somebody else decided that mattered more than everything.